Hey, everybody. Thank you for all the chatter in that chat. I love seeing where everybody has been. It makes me want to plan a vacation. I love it. And I love that I'm not the only one. James and I are not the only ones old enough to remember that song.
I was riffing off that Sticks.
So great. So great. Well, keep putting if you are just joining us, and I know people have joined us, it's still just a couple minutes after the hour. So we're going to have, after the bottom of the hour. So I know we'll have more people joining us. And as you do so, please feel free to tell us where you are and where your best vacation was. I love that some of you live in places others would consider their best vacation, and some of you go to places that I would never consider a vacation. But I think it's a lot more than just the location. So keep sharing that information. I think it's really fun to see where everybody is. All right, as usual, we have people from all over the country, and I love that when we have our events in the afternoon like this, or the evening, if you're closer to the East Coast, maybe it's time for happy hour for you. Your camera's not on. I'm not going to judge you, whatever. But we get to have our West Coast and Hawaii people on, and it's not the crack of dawn. So welcome to Oregon, California, Washington, and Hawaii. Sometimes we get left behind. And so this is for you. You're welcome. What are we doing today? That's an excellent question. I happen to have some answers for you. We are going to start with a little poll because I want to know who is aboard our ship today. And then we're going to set up the workshop part of our webinar today I'm just going to give you a little background information and some context about why storytelling is important in sales and marketing, not just for our chapters as BNI members, but also for your businesses. And so hopefully you're going to be able to take away some things for both those areas. And that's what the next part of the agenda is, stories in action, where you are going to actually create your own story to use in your sales process at your business, or in your chapter with visitors, or a variety of other places that it might work for you. So you will come away with a file or a piece of paper to help you going forward. Maybe even next week you can do something. And then there's nothing left to do once you have those tools in your hand, except set sail for a successful horizon. That is not easy to say 3 times fast, so I'm not even going to say it again. So that's our plan for the next hour, for our 1 hour cruise, our 1 hour cruise. Let's start with a poll and see who's here. Oh, wait, was it already on here? Did people already answer this? Hold on, let me start this again. Relaunch the poll. All right, let's see who is here. Are you incoming visitor host? So maybe you don't start until October 1st. So this is your first cruise. You are welcome. Or maybe you're a visitor host right now. Are you just a member who wants to make a difference in your chapter or in your business? We welcome you passengers on the ship as well. And if you're a crew member, one of our chapter success coaches, thank you for being on here, because we know this will help you in your business, your chapter, and the chapters you are supporting. So your members are going to thank you. And I may have a few of my colleagues who are managing directors. I know Andy B is on here from Rhode Island. So we may have a couple of other of my colleagues on here. We're going to call you the ship's captain just because I've been telling James today, I love a theme and we're just going to go crazy with it. I like to plan that way. Hey, Anne all right, you already answered it. Well, let's see. I know I'm not claiming to be good at technology. Look at the color of my hair. That can't come as a surprise to anybody, but let's see the results, shall we? Share results. There we go. All right, so we have a lot of incoming visitor hosts. This could not make me happier. I'm so excited that you're here because you're getting a sneak peek into what you're about to do as a visitor host in having a connection with the visitors in your chapter. It's going to be good for your chapter so you can grow and expand your networks, but it's also going to be good for your business. And everything that we're doing for our leaders in our chapters is meant to help you in both arenas. We don't want BNI just to be good for BNI's sake. If it's not good for your business, what's the point? So if you're a current visitor host, I also want to commend you because you've only got like 4 meetings left and you're still here trying to make a difference, trying to learn something, #lifelong learning. Good for you. And for the rest of you, welcome aboard. We won't have very much food unless you brought it yourself. But here we go. All right, so let's set up our context. I know a lot of you know James and you see him, but I'm going to give him a proper introduction in just a few minutes. So you all just sit tight on the edge of your seat. It's going to be very exciting. All right, I want to start with a little bit of information about stories in sales and marketing, because it is not something that has always existed. This book, Made to Stick, apparently has had quite an influence, and these brothers, Chip and Dan Heath, uncovered what I think is a very interesting statistic. They said that after a presentation, 63% of people remember stories, while only 5% of people remember a statistic. I'm going to say that again because I think it's very important. 63% of people who are sitting through a presentation will remember the stories in that presentation, and only 5% will remember some sort of a fact or a statistic that was mentioned. So that is going to set us up for what we're going to talk about today. Forbes and LinkedIn, also, I found some interesting facts with these two very well-respected sources. These are some elements we might want to include in our stories, and I know James is going to unpack this for us a little bit more, but certainly elements that make successful stories in our sales and marketing. And one is to separate between logic and emotion. And if the Heath brothers are right, and people are really going to remember stories which tug at our emotions more, we want to lean into that. Forbes says that as much as we'd like to think of ourselves as being very logical and rational people, we may use those skills and that personality type to look at the services and products we may buy. But chances are, when we actually make the final buying decision, it might be based on our emotions. And so we can use that to our advantage, not in a manipulative way, but knowing that it's true, we can try to make a connection between us and our brand and the people that we're trying to reach, because people won't necessarily remember statistics or facts or anything you tell them, but they will remember how they felt when they heard about your brand or when they had an encounter with you. So we want to tap into the emotions, and stories are a great way to do that. In addition, we want to be sure that we're adapting our stories to the specific audience we're trying to reach. And I know I have at least one photographer on this call, so this might be a good example. If you run a photography business, you are going to tell a different story to an engaged couple who needs a photographer for their wedding than you would if you're talking to a business owner who needs very specific product photos for a website. And so we want to know who our audience is, and this is easily transferable to what we do in B&I. You can't market to everybody, you can't sell to everybody. And so when we have our weekly and feature presentations, the more narrow and niche we can be about the audience we're trying to reach and the problems we're trying to solve for them, the better we'll be able to fashion the stories and the messages that we're telling. And the penultimate element we want to keep in mind is simplicity. We want to be sure that the stories we're telling are easy to follow, beginning, middle, end, and we don't want it to go on and on and on. Some people are great storytellers. Most people think they're great storytellers. So if we keep it short and simple, and we're going to have some of those really great, a great rubric and kind of a plan today for those stories to make sure that you're not going off the rails and making a crazy story. And then finally, this is something that I know James is going to talk to us about. A hero and a helper in a story is very compelling because we can all relate to one or the other. And we want to have those kinds of stories easily accessible for the people we're talking to, so they know why and how they want to make a decision to buy the product or service that you're presenting. So logic and emotion, audience adaptation, simplicity, and having a hero in your story. These are important elements, not all of them, but they are pretty cool. And this one, I just wanted us to see before we launch into the next section, because I didn't realize that storytelling in sales and marketing is such a recent development and how much it's changed just in the last 10 years. When I looked at this, I laughed out loud here at my desk. The brand is new and improved, kids, now with 50% more claims than the leading brand. Consumers lived happily ever after. The end. I love the kids. Boring. Where's mom? Oh, it's fantastic. But this was what storytelling had to be like up until 2011, this was kind of what we thought of was storytelling in sales and marketing. And then one thing that happened that started to change things was in 2012 at the Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity, which was birthed from the film festival in the same city in France. They had a new category of awards that they gave out called Branded Content and Entertainment. And so now we take storytelling for granted. We see all of these great ads. You've seen probably the sketch artists who do little commercials on YouTube and things. But the question is, are we good at it? That's what we want to know. And is it effective in our businesses and in our chapters? So we know it exists. We know it's come a long way just in the last decade or so. And so what we want to do is make it effective and relevant to the things that we're doing now. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, I have the distinct pleasure and honor of that, James. Yeah.
Nice.
Of introducing my now friend and colleague, because we're going to do a bunch of these. He's going to be sick of me by the end. We've got like 10 things lined up in the next few months. You may know him because you have heard of or read his book, The Perfect Close, The Secret to Closing Sales. He has also done one of these webinars with me before. He is a sales expert. He has multiple jobs. He wears multiple hats, and he is in the process of writing another book, aren't you, James?
I am.
Yes.
On referrals, no less. So
what? Yes. And like I always like to say, BNI loves James Muir, and I'm pretty sure James Muir loves BNI.
That's a fact. That is
Yes,
a fact.
yes. So ladies and gentlemen, why don't you give some clap icons or some exclamation marks in the chat and help me welcome James Muir.
Well, I don't know how I can top that. That introduction's better than the one my mom wrote for me. So there you go. So that's some good advice right there. In fact, that's gonna shorten the beginning. So we're gonna take what Jenny just said, and how do you do what all that insight that she just gave us on storytelling? How do you turn that actually into a story? And so as she and I were brainstorming this session, we thought, well, rather than just give a bunch of academic information, why don't we actually have them walk away with having completed the story? So what we're about to do is we're going to try the impossible. We're going to combine Made to Stick and 3 other books on storytelling into one session where you walk out and you've got a story done that you can use for BNI, but you'll also be able to use the same template for your own personal business. Okay. And so that's the goal here. So I don't know if I
stop sharing.
Yeah, if I can share a screen or two, then we'll be good to go here. And so maybe the difference between this and some other sessions that we've done in the past is this one is going to be all about you're going to get something done, right? We're going to get real practical here. So are you seeing my screen okay?
Yep.
Jenny. All right, well, perfect. Well, I can't top the introduction that Jenny gave me. So all I'm going to say is that there are actually a number of experts out there that almost everyone acknowledges that storytelling when it comes to sales is a top skill. But there are a number of experts out there that claim that the storytelling itself is actually the top skill. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on the academic part. I guess got 2 slides on it, but there are a lot of reasons for that. And so if you focus 100% on our time that we have together today, what you're going to do is you're going to walk out of here knowing how to craft messages that are both memorable and they're persuasive. And you're going to have a message that you can use immediately for BNI when we're finished with this. Okay. Now, I think we should probably upload the spreadsheet, or the worksheets at this point. So if you look in your chat, Jenny is going to send you a couple of, I don't know if you're going to do the PDF or the Word document or both, but we're going to use that worksheet, and you can print it out and write on it, or you can reference it and write it on a notepad or whatever. But we actually are going to go through all that stuff as we go through, and it won't take long. I think you'd be surprised at how fast this will go. But when you're all done, you'll have your own story created for BNI, and then I will show you how you can get some free stuff at the end by sharing your story. So. But I want to share a story with you to start off with, right? And I think that you guys will like it because it is literally one of the most mind-blowing examples of referrals that I've ever heard of. And it actually happened to me personally. And maybe that's the reason that I resonate with BNI so much. But this is about 20 years ago. And I'm working with this lady that you see in this picture right here. Her name is Leanne Rich. And at that time, I was selling medical information systems for next-gen healthcare, and Leanne had a system that was failing them. and it had already cost them a lot of money, actually. In fact, they'd already gone to the bank to borrow money to keep their business going. Okay, so they were kind of in desperate, situation. So I do a discovery with these guys, and I listen to our situation, and after I listen to everything, I'm like, man, we are really overkill for what these guys are trying to do, right? And all they really need is just a simple system that can do claims edits. And so I'll be honest with you, I was kind of conflicted about it. I mean, the rapport was there. She totally trusted us, and we definitely could do everything that she wanted, right? And then some. And they were kind of desperate. And so I struggled with it for a second there, right? I was like, man, they're all, I've got sales quotas to deal with, and there's all the time that we just spent. And I thought, man, maybe I could just slam dunk this, right? But instead, what I did, rather than sell her something that she didn't need, I actually referred her to someone else instead. I recommended 2 other competitors' systems that I thought would be a better match and less than half the price of what we would have charged her. And by the way, these systems are typically hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay, so that me doing that, saving her a lot of money. And so I gave her the contact information. Honestly, I didn't think a thing about it again after that, right? I never really expected to hear from her again because I figured she's going to choose one of these other 2 vendors. All right, so fast forward 2 years, and I get a call from Banner Health Systems. Now, if you don't know who Banner Health Systems is, Banner Health Systems is one of the largest health systems in the West. And they're headquartered in Phoenix, but they got hospitals all over the Western United States. Anyway, they're evaluating health information systems. And long story short, we end up selling them a health information system for about $5 million. It's a very big deal. And then over the next few years, they purchase another $5 million worth of stuff from us, software and services and things, right? So the total value of this deal is over $10 million. And during that time, I ended up meeting Glenn Edwards, who's over all their IT. And I wish I had a picture of me with Glenn, but he's kind of picture phobic. He wouldn't let us take pictures with him, but he loved M&Ms. He was an M&M fan. He had all this M&M stuff. Anyway, so years after the initial purchase, I'm having a conversation with Glenn, and I'm like saying, hey, how did you end up calling us to begin with? And you will never believe what he said. He said that he had been referred by this Leanne Rich, who I had only met and briefly met with for maybe 2 years ago. Just briefly, we met with her, right? And that's what caused him to call us, right? And I'm like, wow, that was a big surprise. And so think about this for a second. What did I learn here? We all know that there's this principle out there called reciprocity, right? I helped Leanne, and then she reciprocated 2 years later by suggesting me to Glenn Edwards. But here's the thing. Did I help Leanne Rich thinking, oh, I'm going to help Leanne Rich, and then she's going to refer a $10 million deal to me? Did I do that? No, I did it because it was the right thing to do. Okay. And so this whole experience, it took 2 years, right? The culmination of all this, really longer than that, taught me something. And I mean, we all know that principle of reciprocity is out there, or karma, or whatever you want to call it. Okay. And that's how it works. But what the experience taught me personally is that's not why. That's not why we do it. We do it because it's the right thing to do. The experience also taught me about the law of gestation, right? Not everybody calls it that, but basically there's an amount of time it takes for a seed to produce fruit. And sometimes it's fast and it happens right away. And other times it might take 2 years, like it did in this case, okay, or even longer. And so these 2 lessons came out to me, right? So do you think that I personally believe that givers gain? Do you think I believe that? Yes, absolutely I do, right? That one deal was a life-changing deal for me, okay? It's actually one of many. And so if somebody asks me if they should get involved with BNI, what do you think I say? I'm like, absolutely. Don't waste another second. Referrals have helped catapult me and my success and happiness in my career more than any other single thing, right? It's literally been the biggest thing, and in lots of different ways, okay? So with that, that's my example. Okay. And we'll dissect that a little bit, and then I'm going to add another story to this. But that's my example of a story. And so the question is, what makes these stories so effective, right? Jenny told you it's effective, and she gave you some stuff that comes out of Made to Stick. I could spend the rest of our hour geeking out on the science behind why it works, but I'm just going to give you 2 slides on that. Okay. And the first reason I'm going to share with you is that stories are hundreds of times more memorable than statistics are. That's what Jenny said, right? And the main reason for that is sometimes called the Velcro theory of memory. And your memory is like not like a filing cabinet, like computers tend to look at remembering files and things like file cabinets, but that's not how we operate. Our memory is really much more like Velcro, with one side covered with thousands of little hooks and another side covered with thousands of little loops. And every single thing, like a picture or an object or a description or a feeling, has literally hundreds or thousands of hooks that they all anchor to other kinds of memories, other emotions that we have. And so just think of that one picture of me with Leanne Rich. That one picture contains thousands of memory hooks in it. Now we combine that with other people, objects, events, feelings. And when we combine it into a whole story, there's the number of connections is astronomical. And that's why memory and stories perform so much better when they're in stories than if I just told you that I sold a $10 million deal with Banner Health Systems, okay? Now, second thing, you may have heard of oxytocin, right? Some people call it the love hormone. And as it turns out, when we're sharing engaging stories, not boring stories, but when we're sharing engaging stories, it actually triggers oxytocin in a huge way. And that has quite a number of positive effects that you can see here. It promotes attachment. They like you better, right? It solidifies relationships. It eases stress and relaxes people when they hear a story. It crystallizes emotional memories. And we'll talk more about making your stories emotional here in just a second. It improves social skills and it fosters generosity. Okay, we could spend a lot of time on this, but to suffice it to say is that the science of storytelling is very well studied, and the implications for us is enormous. And that's what was discovered, around 2011, 2012. All right. So if I had to sum up all the other reasons why storytelling works, I would just say it this way. Storytelling works precisely because it is not a sales pitch. It's not a sales pitch. It's a story. It's a story. And so that makes it much, much more compelling. All right. So we know that they're effective, and we know some of the reasons why they're effective. How do we go about actually creating a great story? Okay. And as it turns out, and if there's anybody new, I think we'll upload the worksheets for you. We're going to get to here in just a second. But as it turns out, there are just 8 elements of a great story. Sometimes you only need 7 of these. Okay. And by walking through these, you can make any story that you already have really, really great and much more memorable. And so if you've already got a story, great. You can optimize it by using the ones that the formula that I'm going to share with you here in just a second. So I'm going to touch on these briefly now, and then we're going to drill down on each one. So the first thing is the goal or the objective. Okay. And what this is why you're telling the story. Okay. What do you want the audience to do after they've heard your story? That's kind of your goal. Then there's the hook part. And that basically just quickly communicates why they should be listening to this story. In the context, that's where we start introducing people like Leanne Rich, or it's the where, the who, the when of your story. Okay, then there is the challenge, right? What's the conflict, or what's the problem, or what's the opportunity? What are the stakes involved? Then we've got a conflict. And the conflict is, what did you or the main character that's in the story, if you're telling it about someone else, what do they do to address the challenge? And then the resolution is real easy. It's like, okay, how did it all turn out? What happened at the end? And then lessons are very important. And they're basically just, what did the main character learn through this experience that they had? And then the optional one is the recommended action. Okay. And basically it's, all right, now that you've heard the story, what action does this suggest to you? Okay. All right. So if you've got the worksheet, we're going to drill down on this, but at its core, there's really just 4 things that make a great story. A hero that we care about, that's revealed in the context. A villain that we're afraid of, that's revealed in the challenge. An epic struggle between those two, that's revealed in the conflict. And a worthy lesson. Okay, that's revealed in the lessons, of course. And so these 4 things make a great story. And while there is a little bit of both art and science in storytelling, what we've done here is we're going to spend the rest of our time is give you a simple, easy to follow formula for creating your own stories. And we're actually going to create one. We're going to create a BNI one. And then you're going to be able to apply that with that worksheet that you just got to anything that you want to do in your business. And I'm going to give you a list of possible stories that you could do before we're done.
Hey, James.
Yes, ma'am.
Before we start that part, I wonder if for somebody maybe who hasn't been on one of your webinars before or doesn't know this, one of the things I think is compelling for us to remember when we're talking about sales, because you said doing a story doesn't feel like a sales pitch because it's not a sales pitch. I wonder if you could talk just for a couple of minutes about why sales in general, why us pursuing selling our product or service is noble. Because I know you have talked in previous conversations we've had about every sale, everything that we're doing does one of three things. And I think when we remember those three things, it might give some helpful context to these stories before we go to the next one.
You bet. I'll tell you a little story that illustrates this actually.
Perfect.
I mean, I don't want to, I won't make this too long, but it's like Jenny said, everything that we sell, everybody that's on this call, either help someone avert a crisis, fulfill a dream, or achieve a goal. Okay. So one of those three things. And some of them are actually quite noble, but when you get right down to it, I actually I went into a healthcare organization, and they had just converted all of their account managers, and they said, you're all now quota carrying salespeople. You have to get money from your customers. And I was there just to teach them the basics of selling, right? And then I get in there and they're all looking at me. They're like, how am I supposed to face my customer now that I have my hand out? How can I face them now that I've gone to the dark side? That's what they were saying, stuff like this. I'm like, oh my gosh, you've got the wrong idea about what selling is. Okay. And so selling, a lot of people are confused. They think selling is about persuasion or manipulation or, cornering people into making a decision or even pressure. And it's actually none of those things. Okay. All you're doing is you're facilitating a decision on their behalf. You're helping them realize what's in their own best interest. You're not trying to force them into a decision that wouldn't make sense for them. We don't do that. Remember, in fact, use my banner story. We do the right thing because it's the right thing. So if it's not right for them to have your product or solution, what you ought to do is recommend someone else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you'll get a $10 million deal 2 years later, right? So we do the right thing because it's the right thing. And what that will do, guys, it will take all the pressure off of you, and you'll be able to enjoy all the moments that you're with people, because all you're doing is you're going in thinking, hey, how can I best serve this person?
Mm-hmm.
Now, learning how to tell your story in the story format rather than just telling them facts is a very good way to do that, because it reduces their barriers. If they feel like they're having a potential sales conversation with you, they raise their shields up,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're like, oh, you're just trying to sell to me. I better watch out. And if you think about it, what if you did that with your doctor, right? What if you're like, doctor says, well, tell me a little bit about your symptoms or what's going on. You're like, oh, I don't know. You might recommend medicine to me, or you might recommend a procedure. I don't know if I can, I don't know if I can do that. So prescription without diagnosis is malpractice, right? And so you see how completely dysfunctional it becomes when we don't have the right intention. And so all we're trying to do is just help the customer, regardless of whether it involves you. Sometimes it'll involve you and sometimes it won't. Okay, that's the short version. Now, in this case, we're going to be talking about BNI and creating stories that help them. By sharing a story of how you were helped, you're sending the message to them that this could potentially help you as well. You're not making them do it. You're just helping them understand that there's some value potentially for them. So I don't know, Jen, I could have done a totally different story, but I just, is that what you were going for there?
Yes, no, I think that's important, because when we think about whether it's helping visitors understand the value of a BNI membership, or if it's doing something in our own business, I think it's important to remember that selling is just helping people.
It's serving.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's serving.
yes, selling is serving. It's a noble
Yeah,
thing, right?
it
And
is.
actually, when you and your customers are both helped that way, it's a virtuous cycle. Their lives are improved and your life is improved, right?
Yeah.
And so we just want to keep going up and up in a
Yeah.
virtuous cycle like that. So that's what selling is. And,
Right.
and I could give you a much longer, like if we have time at the end, I'll give you a much longer story that illustrates that perfectly,
Okay.
that we've done in another webinar. But
Yeah.
if you're hung up on that, don't get hung up on that. You're
Yeah.
helping the other person, right? We would never ask them to do something that wouldn't be in their own best interest. So what we're trying to do really is get them to open up enough so that we could say, oh, hey, I think this thing would benefit you.
Yeah. All right. So we just had to take the ship a little off course. Now we're going to go back onto our charted course to keep the theme going.
Okay, good.
As you were, Mr. Muir, as you were.
All right. So let's start with our goal or our objective. Okay. You got to have, why are you sharing this story? Why are you even thinking about sharing this story right now? And you want to answer this question. What are you hoping the other person or the audience is going to think, feel, or do? That's it. What it's one of those three things. Okay. So sometimes we might share that directly with them, right? You might say, hey, let me share something that I think will make you feel differently about that. Like we just did actually around selling. Okay. And then, but the whole point of this part, this is not part of the story. This is just to give your story focus. It's as you're constructing it, you want to make sure that it's everything that it's doing. Remember how Jenny said it needs to be short. It needs to be concise. Okay. So we don't want this big old long story that has a lot of things in it that we don't need. We want it short as possible, but still have all the most essential elements that we're looking for. So this part is just a focusing element of it, right? And so it's really most helpful during the creation phase. And my purpose in sharing that banner story with you is to get you thinking and illustrate the giver's gain. And that we do that not because we expect something in the return, even though that's really, that's what happens, but because it's the right thing to do. And I also wanted to remind you that some of our efforts bear fruit immediately and some of our efforts take years to culminate, right? So that was the purpose of my story. That's why I shared that. And by the way, I used that story many times. I didn't have to change the story is what I'm trying to say. All I had to do was write it down. So let's talk about the hook for a second. Some people call it the transition in, but it's how you get started. And the purpose is just to get their attention and answer the question, why should I listen to this story? And it's really a benefit for listening without revealing any of the surprises in the story. You want to save those for later on in the story. And this whole story is shorter. Like you're going to see me assemble an example of B&I story. And when we're done, it's 90 seconds or less to tell the story. Okay, so it's actually very short. But this part, the hook is usually one sentence. In my banner story, it was, I think you're going to like it because it's the most mind-blowing example of a referral that I can know of. And it actually happened to me personally. So that was meant to get you like pull it in, right? You're like, oh, wow, I wonder what that is, right? And so I've given you some stems, some sentence stems over here on the right. But you could just say, hey, I think the best example of that I've seen, and then you're going to finish the sentence with something. Or one that I'm going to use for the one that I'm assembling today is maybe you're talking business, and I'm going to say, oh, you want to know the best way that I know of to get new business? Mm-hmm. Okay, and so that's a provocative question that sort of draws us in. Okay, obviously you're going to do whatever you're comfortable with, and I'll give you some more thoughts and ideas on how you can say that in a way that might be comfortable for you. The context is the where, the who, and the when of the story. Okay, like, where did it take place? When did it take place? And who are the characters? And this is when you're going to introduce the hero. And basically it's who they are, what they're trying to achieve. And the most compelling hero for your story is one that they can relate with. Okay, so don't tell stories about Superman. Okay, because they can't relate, they can't see themselves being Superman. They can't fly, they can't bend steel bars, they can't jump over a building with a single bound. They need to be able to see themselves in the main character. So the closer your character is to the person that you're talking to, the better. Because they're actually going to, just like when you go to a movie and you put yourself in the role of the protagonist, that's the same thing that's happening in your little story. Okay, and you might actually be the hero in the story, or it might just be someone that you know, but just make them relatable. Okay, don't make them superhuman. The audience doesn't care if there's no challenge for Superman. Okay, now, and Jenny mentioned this at the beginning. She said the hero helper combo. Okay, one of the books I'm going to recommend is Building a Story Brand. You'll see that at the end, so you don't have to write that down. But in that book, they describe a guide, right? And they describe the hero. And the thing that people can get confused when they typically make stories is they make the stories of they're the hero. And what you really want, the best stories, okay? You can use a story where you're the hero, but the best stories actually have you as the guide, you're Yoda, right? And the customer's Luke, right? So those are the best stories. If you can tell a story about another client where you helped them and where you were an observer and you watched this challenge that they have, those are actually the best ones because they can see themselves fitting in there in the same relationship that you're going to have with them, okay? So if you can, use those types. And this is also when we introduce other characters, their motivations. And so spend a minute, deciding what background it is that you might need for them to best understand that. And then it's going to be unique for every story, but I've given you a sentence stem right down here at the bottom just to jumpstart your thinking. We're not doing this right now. So in a minute, you're going to get time to actually do these things. So don't sweat. This is the orientation part. All right. So the challenge is our villain. Right, without a proper villain in your story, they actually won't care. about the hero or the struggle. So it's a key point that the challenge is the villain, and that's what makes us actually care about the hero. But that doesn't mean that the villain has to be a person. It could be a company, like a competitor, or it could be a thing like a mountain you're climbing, or it could be some kind of a situation that was hard, like in the banner one, it was a situation, right? It could even be yourself, right? I introduced a new idea in the banner one where I said, you know, well, I'll give you another example in a second as we assemble an example one for BNI, where I introduced you're your own challenge. You overcame your own personal barrier. Also, the challenge does not have to have a negative connotation. Okay, it could be some kind of a challenging goal. You know, you want to grow sales by 50%, or it's some kind of opportunity. Okay, a lot of times inexperienced storytellers, they forget the challenge altogether. Okay, and what you end up with is these boring stories. I know you've heard them. You're at work and there's some guy that shows up that's really, he's bragging about, yeah, before I got here everything was terrible, but I got here and now everything's awesome. That's the story. Well, there's no story because there was no challenge. There was nothing to work through there. Okay, and so you can test yourself with this challenge. You can just ask yourself, how would it impact the story if I took the challenge out? If it never happened, would there still be a story here? If you remove the challenge and the story won't happen at all, you got a good one. You've got a good challenge. Okay, so that's the acid test. Is, you know, if I took the challenge away, does the story still make a good story? If it does, you don't have a story. You have a boring story about the braggart that's telling you about how awesome he is. Okay, and the challenge has actually the potential. It's different. Everyone's story is different, but it has the potential to be the shortest part of the story. Actually, sometimes it's just one sentence. And the reason for that is it's usually an unexpected event or some kind of thing that the hero realizes, right? I realize, oh, wow. Okay. And so it doesn't take long to describe. You're going to see that in my example that I give you here in a minute. Okay. The conflict or the struggle, it answers the question, what did the hero do about it? What do they do? Now that we have this challenge, what do they do about it? And the number one thing that makes a story irresistible is, you know, that gets the audience kind of sitting on the edge of their seats and they're captivated and you know, they want to listen to every word that you're saying, is conflict. So you don't want to make it too easy for the hero to get what they're after, right? Let the audience see the struggle a little bit. And again, remember, sometimes that struggle is internal. Like in my banner story, I was conflicted. I'm like, wow, here I could make this sale. I think I could make this sale, but the right thing to do, I think, is to just point it in another direction. But man, then you have upper management saying, hey, where's my money, right? I want quota. And so I would struggle with that for a little bit. But let me flip it. Let me flip it, and you can see how bad it is when you forget this. Okay, so here's a story. Bob desperately needs a 3/4 inch socket wrench to finish his project. Okay, there's no way to complete the project without it. So he reaches into his toolbox and grabs one. The end. Okay. Now, do you see how wrong that is? I mean, it's so wrong. It's actually shocking. I mean, it violates our core understanding of what a story really is and what it should sound like, right?
I was on the edge of my seat.
Oh yeah. So, you know, it's got a hero, right? It's got an obstacle. He doesn't have a socket, but there's just no struggle there. And so we just don't care. It's too easy. So it's an important point, is that when you're creating the conflict or the struggle, you know, you have to let them see the hero struggle. It doesn't mean that you have to spend a long time talking about it, but they have to know that, man, I'm conflicted. I don't know what to do here, or whatever the challenge is. It could just be that there was a lot of hard work involved or something, right? I don't know. So we'll talk more about that in a second, but that's a key point, is you don't omit the struggle. It's an important part of the story. Now, the resolution is easy. It's just, you're going to explain how everything turned out. And if it affected multiple characters, right, some kind of a win-win scenario, then you want to be sure to include that. If not, just share how things turned out for the hero. And it's very often, the resolution is actually one of the easiest parts of the story, because you're basically saying what happened. It's easy to, when you're writing these stories, this is the easiest part, because you already know what the end result was. And so you don't have to be all that creative about crafting a sentence or anything. All right, so then there's lessons learned. And for sales stories, it's important to have a goal or an objective for sharing the story. Why did you share this, right? And so lessons learned, this is a pretty good element to put that in, okay? Or the next one that's coming that's optional. But one of the easiest ways to transition to lessons learned is just to start with a phrase like, you know what I think I learned from that was, and then finish a sentence, okay? What is good about sharing this is, say, share what you learned about it. Okay, this is a little tip. Not say what we can all learn about this story. Don't do that. Don't do that, right? Say, here's what I learned. And the reason you want to do it that way is because you're sharing you personally, but it lets the other person come to whatever conclusion they want about the story. You're not, you're not foisting your lesson onto them. You're just sharing, they can't disagree with the lesson that you learned, but they could disagree if you said, hey, what we can all learn from this, right? So don't push it too far. Just share your own experience. Okay. It also, this moment, it signals that the story is basically over and now you guys can talk about it. So a lot like everything, you can personalize this in lots of different ways. So there's lots of different, I've given you 4 possible transitions on the screen here, and you'll see these on the screen here in just a second when we start building your own. Okay. All right. And then lastly, this is an optional component, but we've got a recommended action. So now that you've told the story, does this suggest that someone do something? Okay. And not all stories will end with a recommended action, but if it's appropriate, then this is the place to do that, right? And so I've given you a couple sentence stems here, and you heard me use it in the banner story. I just, that's why if someone asks me what I think about BNI, what do I say, right? Of course, I recommend it, right? And so these stems are very easy ways to transition into that. For that reason, I typically recommend, and then you're going to put whatever your recommendation is. Okay. All right. So you've probably already recognized, hey, you're not only going to be able to apply these principles to BNI, but you're going to be able to do it to your own business as well. Okay. And so what we're going to do right now is we're going to create a BNI story, and then you're going to apply that same process to your own business. I'm going to give you a list of stories you should create. But for now, what I want to do is we're just going to start with the basics. And then in a minute, I'm going to teach you how to make the stories even better. So don't get too hung up. We're just going to get the core sentences in there, right? The concepts in there. And then at the end, we'll buff that up. You'll have a little time for that.
Yep.
So, all right. So now is the time for the worksheets. So if you are brand new, we'll upload the worksheet for you. Oh, it looks like she just did it not 5 minutes ago or less. So there is a Word document that is there, and you can use that. So open that up. By the way, you could just use that as a reference and then write it on a piece of paper. It's not all that critical that you use the form. It's just so that after this is over and you're going to create these other stories for your own business, that you've got the template sitting there. Okay. All right. So where we're going to start is on this little section here that says, all right, well, what's our goal? And really what I want to do is normally that would depend on the story that you're telling. In this case, since we're doing a BNI story, and I'll let Jenny add another one if you want, but what I'd like you to pick is either attend a BNI chapter, or your goal is to apply to become a BNI member. So one of those two. Do you want to add any other potential goals maybe on there?
No, I think we should make it simple, because this is great since we have the majority of people on here are visitor hosts. This can be good if you are inviting, because you're a member. So we should all be inviting people. So that's the first goal. How do I invite people using a story to come to my meeting? Or if maybe you are in the visitor host role and you're talking to a visitor who's come to your chapter and you're telling them about you're telling them the story so that they will want to fill out an application and see if they can be a part of your chapter. I think if we stick to those, that's going to be good.
Okay, perfect. This work should be easy. So just pick one of those two and you're good to go. In the hook, again, this just communicates why they should listen to the story. They usually have a curiosity element as well as a benefit element. And there are actually a lot of reasons to get involved with BNI, but I chose getting a new business as the theme that I'm using for the little example that I'm assembling for you, right? So in my case here, I've got the, you want to know what the best way I know of to get new business. Okay, but I've got, a couple others here. Oh my gosh, I discovered the best way to get new business. You're all excited, right? Or I might be able to get you some new business right away, actually. So all of these are ways. Use what's comfortable to you. I'm just giving you some examples. All of these were comfortable for me, but I'm extroverted. What can I tell you, right? And I don't know if you want to add into that, but basically you're just going to write a 1-sentence hook here, right? And then we're going to move into element number 3. Now, before we go to element number 3, I want to stop and do a sidebar before going into context. And that is, this is about choosing the story that you're going to use. And so a lot of us have a lot of experiences that, so it might be hard initially to identify which one's going to be the best one. So what I want you to do here is, before you go to context, just brainstorm a little bit. Now that you know what the goal is, you're like, all right, well, what is the best way, or what stories do I know of, either mine or somebody else's, that would illustrate, or, that got me clarity around that idea. And what I want you to do is just kind of write those out. That's it. And give them a one word name or whatever.
Mhm.
And then, so maybe you have 4 or 5, like, oh, okay. And then we're just going to pick which one is the best one. Okay. That doesn't mean you can't come back later, and you can write stories for every one of them if you want to, because they'll all have slightly different utility when you're sharing them. But for now, just pick which one you think is going to do the best job at that. And then we're going to go on to context. So, and I think now is about the time when we're going to start writing in a minute. So with, close to 200 people or whatever we have on this call right now, when you get done, if you'll just type in the chat, done, or I'm ready, or whatever, then that'll let us know how much longer we need to wait in order to make sure everybody has time to get their stuff done. All right, so context. Again, now we're going to add some context to our story. And just to keep this part simple, all I want you to do is write out, where did it happen? When did it happen? And who was involved? That's it. If you get down super fast with that, awesome. You can start writing sentences. Okay. But you don't really need to create the narrative right now.
Mhm.
Okay. And so if you think about the story that I'm sharing with you, I'm starting to assemble down here in my example of BNI story. And so this one says, I remember years ago when I went into business for myself back in Idaho before I got involved with BNI. Okay. So we know it was years ago. We know I was before I went into business with myself, right? I was just going into business. It was in Idaho, and I hadn't gotten involved with BNI yet. And we did all that with a single sentence. Okay. So there's a nice economy going on there. So what I want you to do right now, again, where did it happen? When did it happen? Who was involved with that? And then if it turns out you're super fast, go ahead and start writing a sentence out. And what I'll do is I'll check the chat here. Holy smokes, you guys are chatters.
I know you've missed a whole bunch of conversations.
Clearly.
But Ferdinand is very efficient, and he's like, done. He's already ready to move on. Kim,
nice.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you've got it done, type in you're done in there. That'll give me, as soon as we see a good sampling in there.
Yeah.
Not everybody's chatters, but you do have a lot of people in the chat.
We do a lot of people chatting. And since we only have like 11 minutes left, we're gonna, even if you're not done, we're probably gonna move on.
Okay. All right. Well, this part's fast, so let's keep going.
Yeah.
We'll allocate most of our time to longer parts. Okay. So this is the challenge. Okay. And the question, what was the problem or the opportunity? And remember, it's the challenge that's the villain. And so in my example that I'm reading down here that I'm assembling, I said, well, I figured out almost immediately that while everyone loved the quality of my work, I didn't have enough customers to actually make any money. In fact, with all my overhead, I was actually losing money. Okay. So I'm building a BNI example down here, and yours may not match that, but anyway, I'm just using, I've talked to a lot of BNI folks, and so I assembled this one. The challenge here is, of course, not having enough customers to make money. Again, it's just 2 sentences. So what I want you to do, identify your challenge, what was it, and just write it out. You don't necessarily have to create a sentence right now. It's just, 1 sentence or 2 sentences. You're going to get another chance to polish it up here in just a second. Okay?
James, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking of more examples. I know when we spoke earlier, I said, I can't really think of anything, but it's going to be a very specific instance. It doesn't have to be the width and breadth of your whole business experience, right? So if I'm thinking of something like, every time when I first started my business, every time it was time to look at QuickBooks and do anything with finances, I wept. And I didn't want, I was like, I want to have a business. I want to do the things I'm doing, but I cannot cry every time I'm looking at my finances. And it was in a BNI chapter that I met a bookkeeper who stopped me from crying. And so I'm starting to think that one specific example could probably turn into a bigger story, right?
A whole story. Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so, and we'll talk more about how to add drama to that, but there's plenty right there already. Right. I mean, if you're crying every time you're looking at the finance side of it, it's like, that's delivering the message of how struggling it was. And so, and if you do it wrong, it could be business ending too. Right.
Yeah.
So we can raise the stakes quite a lot with something like that. Yeah. All right. Well, let's keep rolling here. I see some bunch of dones in the chat. So now we're going to go to the conflict or the struggle. And no struggle means no story, guys. Okay. So just remember, you gotta You got to struggle. Okay.
Mhm.
And so in the example I'm assembling over here to the right, you can say, and here's the thing, in my mind, I had told myself, I'm not a salesperson. That's not what I am. Right. And so I wasted even more money with all kinds of advertising, telemarketing, and everything else that you could think of. I even hired a sales guy for a while, and none of that worked. All it did was put me further in debt. Okay. So there's a lot going on here. I wrote, there's a lot here. And I snuck in a second villain here, didn't I? Right. Myself, when I said I'm not a salesperson.
Mm.
Right. So now I'm not, it's not just that I have a money problem. I also have a me problem about taking accountability for the salesperson part of it. Okay. And so you clearly, you can see that what the struggle is that I'm spending money trying all this stuff, but none of it's working. Okay. So what, and this is, by the way, this is the peak tension of your story. So what I want you to do is write out the elements of the conflict. You don't necessarily have to write the whole sentences right now, but just like, okay, yeah, there was a crunch, a money crunch, or there was a crisis. I had a gig coming up, but I wasn't prepared. And so I had to do all this stuff, right? Whatever the crisis was, put those little elements in there, and then look at this. And then we're going to keep moving on, so we have enough school time to get through all the different elements, but you'll get a chance to buff this up here in just a second. Okay. Now we're going to add the resolution. These are usually pretty short, by the way. So the question is, how did it turn out? Right? If you had some success, this is where it goes. And you can build it out if you want to, but a lot of times it's very short, right? I had a problem, now I don't have a problem. In my example that I'm assembling down here, you can see this one's a little longer. I said, eventually I met Jenny Butts, who introduced me to BNI. And at first I didn't want to do it because I thought, oh, that's almost like selling. And I'm not a salesperson. But as I reflected on it, most of my business is already coming from referrals. So I decided to attend a meeting just to see how it worked. And man, I am so glad I did, because this is going to be my biggest year ever. Almost 80% of my new business is coming from referrals. Okay, so this is the result part. And I actually already buffed this up, so we don't have to do it during the polishing stage, but I've added some elements in here. But one of the things I did is I added a new character, right? Jenny is my character. She's the one that introduced me to BNI. And we'll talk more about some of the embellishments that I added here in just a second. But the resolution is basically, I'm having my best year ever, and 80% of my business is coming from referrals. So what I want you to do now is I want you to write your result, right? And these are the easiest ones because you're just recalling in history, what happened in this story that you're telling. Okay. You don't necessarily have to trick it all out like I just did with this example. Okay.
Good.
Yeah. Feel, felt, found. Good, Tom.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. And by the way, we'll steal from Tom's feel, felt, found in the lesson learning part here coming up in just a second, right? So you can be kind of factual about the results here. You could say, I didn't have business and now I do. That's, or if you want to trick it out a little more, you can say how much business you got, right? That just depends. But then we'll take it to another level and say, what did I learn from that whole thing? Okay. And so that's what step 7 is about the lessons learned. And either as the hero or as an observer. So if you're telling a story about someone else, then you can basically say, here's what I saw, right? Here's what I learned from what I saw. So the example that I'm assembling for you, it says, I learned two really big things from this. First, I learned that I had to be accountable for my own sales. No one was going to do it for me. And second, for me, referrals are the best way to get new business. And it was already my biggest source of new business. BNI just let me get more intentional about it. Okay. So those are the 2 lessons that I chose to use in my story, right? And the takeaway here is what we hope they're going to get out of the story, which should kind of match back, right, to what we had in our object at the very, very beginning of the story. So again, this is the moment. Hopefully you're madly scrambling. You're going to get a chance to polish it all up in just a second, but write down the 1 or the 2 lessons that you really learned from this story or this experience that you're sharing here that we're breaking down into a little story.
I told him if Jenny says to do something, they should do it.
That's right.
That's the most important lesson.
If she says go to the meeting, you better dang well go to the meeting.
Look, he's living the dream now.
Yeah, I know. You'll get your best year ever. I could tell so many referral stories. It's anyway, on a different day,
We'll buy the book.
on a different day, I will tell you about how I sell my customers in a way that programmed them to give me referrals before we even started. And so by the time we even got to the end where they were buying stuff from me, they were already giving me new referrals. And I didn't even have to wait for them to be happy. Right.
Yes.
So another day, we're already
Yeah.
late. Okay. All right. So our last step, which is optional, is you can recommend an action if you've got one. Okay. And if you don't have anything to recommend, that's okay. Don't do that. But in my example here, right down here in the bottom, I said, that's why I always say, even if you're worried it's not going to work for you, like I did, just attend a meeting and check it out. It could end up making a massive difference for you, like it did for me. Okay. So again, you're going to say whatever's comfortable for you, but this was my recommendation, which matches literally exactly what I chose at the very beginning. Right. My goal was to get them to attend a meeting. And right here at the end, that's why I'm saying, hey, even if you're not comfortable, you should come to the meeting just to check it out, because it could make a really big difference for you. Right. And I was uncomfortable. So there's a little art going on here where I'm taking the biggest objection and I'm inserting it and saying, this is the very reason that you should go. Right. There's a little trick I'm doing there. That's psychology is for another day. So you can see that the recommendation ties all the way back, and basically that's it. So what I want you to do is, if you've got a recommendation, now's the time to add it to your little story. It can be rough, right? You don't need full sentences at this point. And then people have stopped typing done in there, so we must be way ahead of them, or they've gotten tired of typing. Let's see if we have anybody that overachievers that are doing good on their stories here.
Several people have said in here, as I've looked back over the chat, that the examples are very helpful, and they would also, everybody says they would like the slides. So if you can,
Adrian Irwin said that no need to take snapshots of every slide. We're going to send you the whole deck.
Yep.
Yeah, it was made so you could go through these. In fact, we're going to go to this slide right here, which you're definitely going to need later when you're doing this for your own business. Okay, this is now you've kind of got the rough of a story. So now what we want to do is go through all those little elements, and these are 7 ideas, of which some of which Jenny already mentioned at the very beginning, for optimizing the story and making it super compelling. Okay, so you've kind of got yourself maybe it's a 6 or a 7 out of 10. This is how to make it a 10 out of 10. And so I'm not going to go into huge detail because I'm going to leave this on the screen. But what I want you to do is review everything that you've done at this point and see if you can insert any of these things. So the first thing you want to do here is, all right, you've done this much work, vet the story. Is this really the right story, or should you have chosen the other story that you were thinking about before? If so, that's okay. Just start over again with the other story, because maybe it fulfills this need better. The second is what Jenny mentioned early on, and which is you want to add emotion. Emotion adds massive amounts of memory hooks that will make the story memorable. So how can you add emotion to the story? So remember, she's crying because she's doing her finances. That's exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about here. Is how did you feel as you were experiencing the challenge? So just think about the challenge, and then if you didn't already write what the feeling was, this is the time to say, how are you feeling because of the challenge? And the more you put in there, I will say the more the better, minus you can't make the story really, really long. So at some point you'll cut. Okay. If there's a possibility of adding a surprise, maybe the solution is not something everybody expects. And if you save that to the end, towards the end where we talk about the resolution, you can get I never even thought about that, right? And that creates an emotion, and that aha moment is a very memorable thing that you can be adding to your story. So just look at all your elements, see if there's a way you can put the punchline, sort of a surprise at the end, which is why you wouldn't want to say it in your hook if you're going to make it a surprise at the end, right?
Well, and James, somebody had asked in the Q&A, and I think it seems like an appropriate time to address it. My colleague Andy said, do the elements of your story necessarily want to go in the order that you've presented them, or can they be switched up? Do you have them in this order intentionally?
I do, and that's what they recommend in the books. However, they all will say, look, it's an art. In the end, there's an art to this. So it is possible to juggle them around as long as it really makes sense and it's more impactful rather than less impactful, right? So I would just say, in the end, you're the arbiter. Or maybe, we asked the school teacher, we asked Jenny, hey, is this story better or is this order better? And then you pick the one that gets an A+. So, all right, drama. So drama is very similar to emotion, but how can you add some drama? Like if Jenny's having a hard time doing her finances, if it's true and it was about to cause her to go bankrupt, then you can add that element because it's sort of dramatic, right? There's some extra tension that we're piling on there. What
Mhm.
happens is sometimes we're embarrassed about that stuff. And so even though it makes for a great story, we don't hide it because we're worried. We're trying to protect our ego. But from a storytelling perspective, you actually want to expose yourself as being superhuman. I don't want to say superhuman. You want to expose yourself as being very authentic and human and struggling, because that's
Mhm.
what they're connecting with. Right?
Mhm.
If you're saying, oh, I'm invincible and bullets bounce off of me and all that, that's not what gets it done. That
Mhm.
they won't remember the story because they
Mhm.
need to be able to see themselves. Wow. I mean, hopefully you're even worse than the person. Like, oh wow, if you can do that, then I can do it for sure. That's what you're hoping they're
Yeah.
gonna come away with. Details. So there's something called a vividness bias. And we don't have time to go into that in detail, but the more vivid the story is, the more memorable it becomes. And so the question is, without making your story too long, what kind of vivid details can you use to enhance the story? And you can use metaphors, you can use funny things that make the people go, oh, all right. And so if you've got that and that's part of your DNA to tell something funny in a funny way, you should do that. Okay. Last is simplify. So after you're all done, after you're doing all this stuff, then you got to simplify and cut it so that there's no extraneous stuff, because they're not going to let you spend 10 minutes telling you the story. You got to be able to get the story in, like I said, about 90 seconds or less. So, and then lastly, there's your delivery. The good news is the data shows that the story itself is more important than how you deliver the story. So the good news is we have time before we ever bump into a customer, before we bump into a visitor. Um, we can craft the story and then we can practice it, right? You can practice it a little bit, and if you do that, then it'll come natural when you're with the person, and so you won't have too much stress going on there. And basically that's it. So your one last exercise here is to use this screen. If you, hopefully you've already been doing this, but you're going to review everything that you've done so far and see if there's any way you can upgrade them. And this is the time when you can actually change them all into sentences if you want to. And then at the end, you'll have a nicely polished story, and in a very practical amount of time. Now, keep working. I'm going to actually tell you the whole story that I just crafted, and I've got it dissected on the screen here so you can see all the elements that I did in my BNI story that I concocted, right? So the goal, if you remember, was to attend a chapter meeting. And so my hook is, for them, is say, well, the best way I know of to get new business, right? I'm trying to draw them in. No, I don't. I want to know that, right? Well, I remember years ago when I first went into business for myself back in Idaho, this is before I got involved with BNI, I figured out almost immediately that while everybody loved the quality of my work, I didn't have enough customers to make any money. In fact, with my overhead, I was actually losing money. And here's the thing: I had in my mind, I had told myself that I'm not a sales guy, right? That's not what I am. And so I wasted even more money, doing all kinds of marketing, telemarketing, everything else you can think of. I even hired a sales guy for a while, and none of that worked. Right? It just put me further in debt. And so eventually, I ended up meeting Jenny Butts, who introduced me to BNI. And at first, I didn't want to do it because I thought, oh, that's almost like selling, right? And I'm not a salesperson. But as I started reflecting on it, most of my business is already coming from referrals. So I thought, all right, I'm going to attend a meeting and just see how it works. And man, I am so glad that I did, because this is going to be my biggest year ever. And almost 80% of my new business is coming from referrals. And so I learned a couple of really big things from that. First, I learned that I'm going to have to be accountable for my own sales. No one's going to do it for me. And then second, for me anyway, referrals is the best way to get new business. It was already my biggest source of business. BNI was just letting me be more intentional about that. Okay. And that's why I always say, even if you're worried that it's not going to work for you, like I was worried about that, just attend a meeting and check it out. Okay. It could end up making a massive difference for you, like it did for me. Okay. So hopefully you can see how I assembled all those pieces together and how it works and how this illustrates that. Okay. Um, let's see here.
What
Kevin
did
needs some help on one of the notes. Which notes did you need, Kevin?
Well, I think he's just saying to put it all together like this is great because over the course of it, he may have missed some little bits.
Yeah.
And so this puts it all together. And I want to be sensitive to people's times because I see that we have lost a few people and we're 6 minutes over. So if I wrote into the chat, be sure that you give yourself a CEU for this. James and I don't have to go anywhere, but we want to be sensitive to the fact that you may have to log off. I will be sending a recording of this webinar. I'll also be sending James's slides so that you can go back and do this again. You'll probably want to put some time on your calendar to work on it a little bit later because this is the kind of thing that's important, but it's not urgent. And so if you don't put the time on your calendar to work on it proactively, you probably won't get to it. But I just want to make sure that I get to address everybody real quick before you log off and go have your dinner or do whatever you're going to do. And we'll let James wrap up. And we are going to be in touch with you. Be sure that you register for your leadership team training in September, including your general session. And we are going to have a great year ahead. And we're going to have more events like this. You will see James again. And if you don't have to log off, you can still see him right now. But I just wanted to make sure that I addressed everybody before we lost them and they didn't have that information. So now back to you, James.
Okay, and I'll go through these real fast so that we can conclude. And then anybody wants to stick around, I'm happy to do any Q&A to help you build your story out. This is just a punch list. You're going to get this deck. So later when you're doing this for your own business, do these first 3 stories first. And then these are some other useful stories as you do it for your own business. Okay, not necessarily BNI. And then I mentioned that we custom tailored this training for you. And most of the concepts in this training came from actually 4 books. So she mentioned Made to Stick at the beginning. And then these 3 books, Sell with a Story, Building a Story Brand, and 7 Stories. And you can see the authors right here. All of these are great stories. What I tried to do is so you didn't have to read 3 books, we can squeeze them all in into this one session. But there's a lot of good titles out there, by the way, on this topic. Now, I wanted to give you an incentive to do this, right? So how'd you like to get some free stuff for investing in yourself?
Yes.
Right? Okay. So here's the deal. You are welcome to take all the time you want polishing your story, even more. But when you're ready, if you email your completed story to Jenny you can see your email right there. Okay. Right. It's jenniferbutts@bni.com. Jenny will let me know and we'll send you a download link for the full audiobook of The Perfect Close. I'll just give it to you for free. I just want you to, my only upside is that I want you to invest in yourself. That's it. Okay. Just remember to pay it forward. Once you become super successful, just remember to give back somewhere. Okay. And so what you're getting here is you're getting a completed story that you can use with BNI. You now know how to do that same process for your own personal business. And then I'm going to give you a free copy of the audiobook. Okay. So investing in yourself has never been better, right?
Yeah, it's such a good book, you guys, too. I've read it and it's really, really helpful. And I just want to thank you, James, for giving me more email. That's going to be awesome.
Do you like the way I arranged it this way? Yes.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
So you're the arbiter of the stories.
Yeah.
And then you just tell me about the link and we'll send them a link. But
send me more email.
Anybody wants to go a little longer, I'm happy to, this is a super condensed version of this, but I'm happy to do any Q&A that people might want. We'll have to pay attention to the chat for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lots of thank yous in the chat. So appreciate that. Nothing in the Q&A. I think the chatter has just been enough to keep everybody occupied as we've looked through the chat. Lots of woot woot and thank you and fantastic, James. Great information. Yeah, all good stuff.
Okay. What was coming up on BNI that they need to know about?
I don't think there are any specific questions at all. I think it was we set it up pretty clearly at the beginning that this will be the beginning and then you can flesh it out as you go. And the books that you mentioned on that last slide are also on the handout, the worksheet that you gave. So when I send that to you, yeah, you'll have that as well. So you have Made to Stick was the one that wasn't on James's slide, but is that on the
Yeah, it's Chip and Dan Heath. And I did pull material from that book, actually. So we didn't collude with each other. She just happened to use the Made to Stick, which is one of my favorites, actually.
Okay. All right. Oh, look at this. Kara wants to know, do you give seminars for corporations? I work for Welcome Wagon.
There you go. Yes, on certain topics, I will do that.
Yeah,
so,
I bet so. All
and
right.
my chat's restricted. I can only send messages to Jenny. So she's a control.
Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I don't know why that's set up that way. Sorry.
That's okay. But if you want to just, it could be on LinkedIn or you can, maybe Jenny can share my email address if you want there.
Yes.
I answer my own email. So
Yeah, when I send the slides, James, you'll send me the slides. I have the worksheet, the slides, the recording. I'll send you a link to the recording when it uploads. And then in that, I will make sure that you all have, and I say you because I'm looking at your chat over on my other screen. I'll make sure you all have James's email as well, so that, you know, I might even just copy you on that email so they can send the emails back to both of us, James.
oh, there you go. Well, that's perfect. Yeah, then I'll have the stories too. So and if I can just encourage you a little bit, we tried to give you enough time to do it. And but if you'll do this, it'll be ingrained in you because you've done it once. And then if you just take the time to do it, right? So you just invested, what, about an hour?
Yeah.
And you'll have the story. You'll find that the story just comes right out of your mouth when it comes time to do it. And so you'll really be grateful at the moment that you need to do it. And then you'll realize, wow, I need something like this for my business. Think about applying this same thing with all these stories to your own staff. If you had a little book, right? You could say, okay, read all these stories here. And then they understand your business so well. It just takes a little bit of thoughtfulness while you're doing the creation part of the story, but then you almost have a little training manual that you can use for all your team.
Well, and I think too, in the same way that we don't want sales to have a negative connotation because we really are helping people, I think sometimes people hesitate putting their story together and doing it proactively because they think, I want it to be natural. I don't want it to feel rehearsed. But I think the intentionality beforehand and the rehearsal is more like acting. I know that I read a book recently that talked about the fact that actors on stage or in a movie make things look very natural because they've rehearsed them so frequently. So if you practice your story and add the details or the drama or whatever it is, so it's really streamlined and focused, and you've told it 100 times, it will seem very natural because it really did happen to you. It's your story and you've just rehearsed it enough.
Yeah. So let me dispel, if you're worried that it's not going to make you spontaneous, let me just tell you what you're really doing. What you're really doing is you spending time now on being thoughtful about how to deliver allows the person who needs the message, who needs your message, to receive it.
Yeah.
So you trying to wing it actually is doing a disservice to the person who needs to receive the message. And so it's designed this way so they can open up and actually receive the message that you're giving. So you winging it, you might leave out some elements, right? In which case it becomes unmemorable, and then they don't act on it, and then they don't get the benefit until years later when Jenny tells them the story, right? Her story or whatever. So anyway, yeah, I wanted to dispel that right away. Don't think that it's not going to make you spontaneous, because even as I was reading the text, could you tell that I was tweaking it? I was not reading it verbatim because I'm just telling the story as I feel the story, right? And so you're going to do the same thing, even though you've rehearsed it, and that's fine. In fact, that's probably better, because what's happening is there's some of the silent conversation or communication that's happening between people, and you're sort of using the force on how to deliver it. So it's going to be minor tweaks, but that means you're on the same wavelength as the other person. But it's that prep work that lets you be flexible like that.
That's such a great way to look at it. I think that's true in a lot of things in life. You're helping someone else by being prepared. I have heard people say, I'm just way better off the cuff. And I was like, you think you are. You're not. Everyone's better with a little preparation. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, James. I appreciate it. We're seeing people drop as they're going to make their dinners, and that is totally fine. This recording will be sent out, as will the slides and the worksheet, so that you guys can all plan on this. This can be your September project, if you will, and send me your stories when they are completed, and then I will send them to James, and you will get some cool stuff.
Okay.
Oh, all right. Thank you, James.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.